Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And numerous people have said, hey Jason, Vince, aka V-Shrunk, over at V-Shred has made a video about 3 tips on squats. What do you think about that? Now, I'm going to get some of V-Shred's fans who are going to come in here. Maybe they're going to see this going to be like, who are you to talk about our hero V-Shred? Well, guys, I actually do know how to squat unlike him. So if you guys want an example, there you go. That was one of my back off sets earlier this week. That's just normal rep work. It's not a max, obviously. And I'm 42 years old, and I think I know a little bit about the squat. Normally, I would give Vince a really, really hard time because I like to make fun of Vince. I like to make fun of the stupid stuff that he says. I like to make fun of the fact that he's weak and doesn't know how to perform basic exercises. However, this was actually some decent points in the video. I'm not sure he worded everything correctly, but the funny part is that I've seen him half squat, right? I've watched him half squat, so I almost feel like someone scripted this video for him. Some coach scripted this video for him because he raised good points and he actually does in videos the stupid stuff he's telling you not to do. So I kind of have to wonder about that. But let's get to the points that he raised. Number one, people shouldn't be worried about their knees tracking past their toes. That's true, absolutely true. Now, he made a bunch of points about torque on the knee and hip as far as the study goes. That doesn't matter. Torque on the joints is not a big deal. Our concern is shear. Our concern is shear. And I think what I'm going to point out later in the video, if you tie in 2 of the points he made, one that's like 9 or 10 minutes in, he talked about the problem of half squatting. Well, actually, that is a concern. If your knees are tracking past your toes on a half squat, and you go look at the studies and the shear stress that has been studied, maximal shear stress is put on the knee joint when you're about 45 degrees from the floor. When your femur, your thigh is 45 degrees, so usually a half squat, right? That's when the most shear stress is on your knee. If you are lifting so heavy that you can only go halfway down, so a lot of you guys out there, I see guys out there who have a max squat of like 225, and I'll see them doing half squats with 405, right? Your knee usually tracks past your toe when you put on the brake. So in other words, if you stop short of parallel, what happens? Anytime you stop before parallel, your knees jut forward in the last couple inches, right? You see your knees will slide way forward. You'll see this massive knee slide happen. And if that happens to happen when you're at a half squat and you're using a weight that's heavier than your 1 rep max, that puts an enormous amount of shear stress on your knee, because not only does it cause the knee slide to happen when you're at the point where there is the most stress, you are now subjecting your knee to a heavier weight than you would ever be able to lift under normal circumstances all the way down. So in other words, your max squat might only be 225, 250 going to parallel or lower, but on that half squat, you got 405 on the bar. And I see guys do that who are literally sub 300 pound squatters. You see it in gyms all the time. It's usually accompanied with a pussy pad on the bar, 9 times out of 10. But you see that, and that is actually going to damage your knees. If you're having knee slide up near the top when you're above parallel, that actually is a concern. Now, once you're hitting parallel or lower, having a little bit of knee slide, absolutely not a problem. It's not a big deal. So again, you shouldn't be worried about it. He's right. Next, he brings up the point of ass to grass. Should everyone squat ass to grass? No, they shouldn't. It's not necessary for everyone to. It is necessary to squat to parallel. And that's just being realistic here. If you cannot squat to parallel, you absolutely need to fix your mobility. That is a top priority for you. You need to fix your squat form, you need to fix your mobility, and you need to find a stance that will allow you to reach that depth. And very, very few people, you can take someone who has horrific mobility and they can't do a squat, and usually within 2 to 3 weeks you can get them doing a squat. And that's usually in a worst case scenario. So when people say, well, I really can't do it, yeah, you can. You just haven't done any mobility work at all. but you need to be able to go to parallel. The problem we have is that without people filming it and without people being objective about it, you see people on social media all the time will say stuff like ass to grass, right? Or I'm doing deep squats. And then you see their squat and they're 4 inches above parallel. And as he pointed out in the video, parallel is when your hip crease drops to the knee level or lower, right? And that's what you need for a meet legal squat and a powerlifting meet. But that's also the ideal depth that you're going to find usually in that range is usually where you're going to have the least shear stress, right? As far as weight use versus range of motion, you're going to have the lowest shear stress, and it's usually going to allow you to hit a heavy enough weight that you're not losing that tightness and everything in the hamstrings, because that's what happens. There's problems when you go too deep. For some people, you dramatically have to reduce the weight. So for some people, the difference between going an inch below parallel versus going ass to grass can literally be 100 pounds difference on the bar. And it has to do with losing the ability of your hamstrings and other things to stay tight and engage correctly to help you out of the bottom. So you're losing muscle activation in some cases. So really parallel is kind of a good spot for a lot of people, or just below parallel. And that's usually what I recommend. Now, some people who are really strong and they have great mobility can go super deep and go ass to grass, and they can lift comparable weights as they can just below parallel. And they can do it without that posterior pelvic tilt happening, or as he called it, butt wink. I would say go for it, absolutely. So there's an individual component there. And ass to grass is also called a full squat. So there's a point to be made there. Now, he did point out the thing about posterior pelvic tilt. Posterior pelvic tilt. But he didn't talk about how to fix it, right? There's corrective exercises for that. If you have a bad problem with posterior pelvic tilt, I think one of the best corrective exercises is the box squat. All right, the box squat. Why? Because it forces you to learn to sit into a position to where when you sit down onto the box just below parallel, and you want a box that's an inch below parallel, at least an inch below parallel, what happens? You can't have posterior pelvic tilt because your weight and the weight of the bar is pushing your pelvis back into a correct position. It will push everything into position with mechanical tension when it's under load. And it will train you to go into a position to where you can't have posterior pelvic tilt, because it's going to force you mechanically into a position to where that tilt disappears, because you physically cannot do it when you sit back into a box. And it will teach you to adjust your technique and form to reduce your posterior pelvic tilt, and it will enhance your mobility, because again, you are forcing that posterior pelvic tilt out under load, because the box itself that you utilize will do that. And I want to point out here, you can't box squat with a bench. A bench is too tall. The average bench is 18 inches. The average bench is 18 inches tall at a gym. I squat to a 13-inch box, and that's just below parallel for me. And for most people, usually even a really tall person, anything more than a 14-inch box is not going to work. You cannot squat on those benches at the gym. And they're kind of an ego thing. In other words, you find most people who they squat to one of those benches, they think they're box squatting. They can squat more than their 1 rep max usually for a couple reps, right? On a normal squat. Normally on a box squat, you can't do more than about 90% at the most of your actual real back squat. So again, it should let you know that what it's doing is it's higher, it's above parallel, right? The box squat on those benches is too high, don't use them. You need to stack plates or use an appropriate height box if you're going to do that. But the box squat is, in my opinion, a beneficial corrective exercise for dealing with that posterior pelvic tilt. Now, the other thing he said, you don't always have to go heavy. I disagree. You need to go heavy. Now, but what's the difference? What's heavy for me? I think me doing that work set early on was fairly heavy. That's relatively heavy. I'm not really going to go lighter than that, because that's rep work. That's rep work. That wasn't even a 5 rep max. I can do at least 5 reps. If you can do it 5 times or more, it's not heavy. So again, we get into different discussions. What I will say, when he's saying when you're going so heavy that your form breaks down or you start cutting range of motion, I would agree with that. If you have to reduce the range of motion on any basic exercise to lift a weight and you can't do the full range of motion with that weight, it's too damn heavy. But that is just being stupid. That's being stupid. That's doing partials. I disagree. I think that you should be using the heaviest weight that you can utilize unless you have a programming reason to do otherwise, like you're doing explosive work, you're doing dynamic effort work, whatever, but you're still going to be utilizing a weight that is heavy for what you were doing. I mean, the goal should always be to lift heavy on a big basic exercise. That's our goal. We're trying to generate tension, we're trying to generate workload, we're trying to generate tonnage. But obviously heavy in the sense of the weight that you can actually control for your target number of reps, whether it's 1 rep or whether it's 10, right? It needs to be an appropriate weight. So I'm going to disagree. We should be going heavy. But there's a difference between going heavy and doing a partial exercise or a really horrific, shitty form exercise trying to lift a weight that you can't handle. There's a difference between the two. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.